picture, if you will, a profoundly shy, deeply melancholic kid growing up in the Midwest. He loves to draw more than anything. But when he finally submits his artwork to his high school yearbook, well, the editors completely reject it.
Oh man, that is just brutal for a kid.
Right. And then, fast forward a bit, and he's a young soldier in World War II. He finally gets into this harrowing combat situation, stares down the enemy, goes to pull the trigger, and realizes he completely forgot to load his machine gun.
Wait, he didn't load it. That is terrifying.
Exactly. But he survives, makes it home, falls madly in love, proposes to the woman of his dreams, and she turns him down to marry another man.
I mean, that is an incredibly staggering string of rejections, fumbles, and heartbreaks. If you were writing a fictional character, you'd probably say it's almost too depressing to be believable, you know?
You really would. But here is the unbelievable part. That exact string of bad things happening, the profound shyness, the awkward missteps, the crushing romantic rejection, that became the literal blueprint for a billion-dollar empire.
An empire read daily by millions of people in 75 different countries.
Exactly. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the life of Charles M. Schulz, known to his family and friends as Sparky, and known to the rest of human history as the creator of the iconic comic strip, Peanuts.
And to really understand Peanuts, you have to look way past the plastic lunchboxes, the theme parks, and those warm holiday television specials.
Right. You have to look at the man himself.
Yeah, you have to understand the surprisingly complex, deeply human, and sometimes very painful life of the guy who actually gave us Charlie Brown and Snoopy. Because Charles Schulz was essentially dealing with intense modern anxieties right in plain sight.
So let's start where those anxieties began. Charles Monroe Schulz was born in 1922 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he was basically branded with the comic strip medium from infancy.
Oh, because of the nickname, right?
Yeah. His uncle started calling him Sparky just a few days after he was born. It was a direct reference to a comic strip horse named Sparkplug from the old Barney Google comic.
And that nickname just stuck for the rest of his life. From a very young age, Sparky was this obsessive artist. He would study the Sunday funnies with his father. And he had this family dog, a pointer named Spike, who actually gave him his very first taste of publication.
Okay, we have to talk about Spike because this dog was wild. He had the most bizarre, terrifying diet imaginable. He would literally eat pins, tacks, and razor blades. Just swallow them.
Which is an absolute nightmare for a pet owner. But, you know, if you're a young, observant cartoonist, it's incredible material.
Seriously. So in 1937, a teenage Sparky sketches a picture of Spike and documents these weird eating habits. He sends it into Ripley's Believe It or Not, and to his amazement, they publish it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's captioned, drawn by Sparky. You'd think that would be the moment he realizes he's destined for greatness. But then, almost immediately after, he faces that brutal rejection from his own high school yearbook staff. They wouldn't even print his senior drawings.
That dynamic a flash of brilliant success immediately followed by a profound, humbling rejection that really defines the early chapters of his life.
It really does.
But the tone of his story shifts into a much darker, heavier reality in November 1942. Schulz is drafted into the United States Army. And this period is marked by a tragedy that would just echo throughout his entire existence.
Oh, this part is so sad.
In February of 1943, literally days before he is scheduled to ship out for basic training, his mother dies after a very long, agonizing battle with cervical cancer.
And he was right there with her at home when she passed. The psychological weight of that is just staggering. He had to pack up that immense, world-shattering grief, put on a uniform, and immediately go to war.
Yeah, that kind of unresolved grief fundamentally alters a person.
He carried a deep, lifelong sadness that she never got to see his work publish or witness his success.
So he goes off to war. He served as a staff sergeant with the 20th Armored Division. He was a squad leader on a .50 caliber machine gun team. And his unit actually saw combat right at the tail end of the war in Europe.
Which brings us back to that combat story from the very beginning. They are pushing into Germany, they are under fire, and he finally has his one and only opportunity to fire his machine gun in actual combat.
Right.
He has a German soldier right in his sights, and in the heat of this massive adrenaline rush, he realizes he forgot to load the gun.
Fortunately, the German soldier surrendered anyway, so the mistake wasn't fatal.
But the psychology of that moment is so vital, building up to a massive life-altering moment and then just completely dropping the ball. Forgetting to load your gun in World War II is like the ultimate high-stakes Charlie Brown moment.
Oh, absolutely.
It is the literal embodiment of good grief.
That's a profound way to look at it. What's fascinating here is Schulz himself later articulated that cartooning, and really all deeply resonant humor, stems from bad things happening. Melancholy was the actual engine of his creativity.
Yeah, because nobody relates to perfection.
Exactly. He realized that watching someone succeed flawlessly isn't funny, and it isn't relatable. What connects us as humans is our shared experience of fumbling and of anxiety, of trying our best and still missing the mark.
So he survives the war, returns to Minnesota in late 1945, and he just starts hustling. He gets a job at a correspondence school called Art Instruction, Inc., reviewing and grading the work of art students.
And this is where the romantic heartbreak comes in.
Yes, he meets a red-haired accountant who works at the school named Donna Johnson. He falls completely, hopelessly in love with her. In June of 1950, he takes a massive emotional risk and proposes marriage.
And she turns him down.
She turns him down. She decides to marry another man instead.
For anyone listening who grew up with Peanuts, you immediately know the significance of this. Donna Johnson wasn't just a painful memory. She became the literal inspiration for the little red-haired girl.
Oh, wow.
She is Charlie Brown's eternal unrequited love. The girl he can never quite muster the courage to talk to, let alone win over.
He took the searing pain of a rejected marriage proposal, and he bottled it. He immortalized it in ink. And while he's dealing with this crushed heart, he's furiously trying to get his art syndicated.
He had this early comic he was pitching called Little Folks, right?
Yeah, Little Folks. In 1950, he pitches it to United Feature Syndicate.
And we should probably pause here to explain what getting syndicated actually meant in 1950, because it's hard to overstate.
Kazoo.
There was no internet, no social media. Syndicates were the absolute gatekeepers of culture. They were essentially the TikTok algorithm combined with major publishing houses.
That's a great way to put it.
If a syndicate bought your comic, they had the power to distribute it to hundreds of newspapers simultaneously across the country. It was really the only way for a cartoonist to go viral back then.
And United Feature Syndicate loved his work. They specifically loved the minimalist four-panel format he'd developed. But then comes a massive twist. For legal trademark reasons, they tell him he cannot use the name Little Folks.
Oh, right.
The syndicate forces him to change it, and they choose the name Peanuts.
A name that Schulz absolutely despised for his entire life.
Can you imagine the frustration? You finally get your huge break, the thing you've been working towards since you were a kid, drawing your dog eating razor blades, and the corporate bosses slap a title on it that you think sounds cheap and insignificant.
Yeah, he thought the word peanuts made the comic sound totally disposable.
Exactly. But despite his hatred for the title, the success of the strip was meteoric. At its absolute height, Peanuts was published daily in 2,600 newspapers across 75 countries.
And translated into 21 different languages.
Over the course of nearly 50 years, he drew 17,897 strips.
Which is just an unfathomable amount of output.
It is. If you're wondering how a guy making an estimated $30 to $40 million a year could still write a convincing comic about a depressed kid who can't fly a kite or kick a football, well, it's because of his unbelievable work ethic.
He was relentless.
He didn't outsource his life to assistants. In nearly 50 years of drawing that daily strip, do you know how many vacations he took?
I actually don't.
One. A single 5-week break in late 1997 to celebrate his 75th birthday. That was the only time reruns ever ran while he was alive.
Wow. He was chained to his drafting table by his own dedication.
And it paid off because he essentially built a Trojan horse. He packaged really heavy adult themes, existential dread, chronic failure, unrequited love, the cruelty of peers inside the soft, safe, rounded drawings of children and beagles.
People thought they were laughing at a cute children's comic, but they were actually processing their own modern anxieties.
Right. And he did it by making the strip a disguised autobiography. Peppermint Patty was inspired by his cousin Patricia, and the name came from a dish of peppermint candies in his house. Linus and Shermie were named after his real-life friends.
He didn't just invent quirky traits out of thin air. He translated his own specific social realities into a universal language.
Even the really weird stuff. You know how Sally is always chasing Linus around, calling him her sweet baboo?
Yeah, classic.
That wasn't some writer's room invention. That was actually his second wife, Jean. She started calling Charles her sweet baboo at home, and just a few weeks later, boom, it's immortalized in the Sunday paper.
It's a perfect example of how the hyper-personal becomes globally relatable when framed through the right artistic lens.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We need to pivot here because the contrast between his sanitized billion-dollar corporate brand and the messy reality of his private life is fascinating.
It really is a stark contrast.
We tend to have this image of comic strip artists living these quiet, gentle, Mr. Rogers-type lives, just sitting by a window sketching cartoon dogs. But Schulz was navigating intense corporate rivalries, artistic philosophy, and genuine real-world danger.
Yeah, let's talk about his biggest rival, a very famous lasagna-loving orange cat.
Oh, I love this part.
The dynamic between Charles Schulz and Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, is one of the most revealing chapters of his career.
Behind the scenes, Schulz actually viewed Davis as his greatest rival. Schulz saw cartooning as high art, almost a philosophical calling. He intensely disliked Davis's approach, which relied on very broad, commercial, low-hanging fruit gags.
And there was definitely some bitterness when Garfield merchandise started to eclipse Peanuts in popularity in the 1980s.
But here is the incredible contradiction of Charles Schulz. Despite that rivalry, Schulz essentially became a mentor to Jim Davis. He advised him on the mechanics of merchandising and franchising.
And amazingly, Schulz is actually the person who redesigned Garfield.
This blew my mind. Jim Davis was really struggling early on because Garfield used to be drawn as this massive, obese cat that walked on all four legs.
Right, the early strips look so different.
Because of that quadrupedal design, it was incredibly hard to execute physical comedy gags in a tiny comic panel. So Schulz actually sat down and sketched out a redesign. He gave Garfield a slimmer, pot-bellied look, and most importantly, made him bipedal standing on two back legs with large human-like feet.
That's the Garfield the world knows today. The creator of Snoopy solved the visual mechanics for his biggest competitor.
And it shows us something profound about Schulz. Protecting the medium of comic artistry was ultimately more important to him than crushing a rival.
He wanted the art form to function perfectly, even if it meant helping the guy who was beating him in mug sales.
It's a true testament to his reverence for the craft. But as his fame and wealth grew, the real world began to intrude on his life in deeply unsettling ways.
Yeah, the illusion of the simple comic strip life gets completely shattered in May of 1988. Two masked gunmen actually forced their way into Schulz's home.
That is just terrifying.
It wasn't a random burglary either. It was a targeted, premeditated criminal act. They brought handcuffs. They planned to kidnap his wife, Jean, and hold her for ransom.
The entire plot only failed by sheer luck. His adult daughter, Jill, happened to pull her car up to the house at that exact moment. The headlights spooked the gunmen and they fled.
Thank goodness. But imagine the psychological toll. You spend your life drawing a kid with a security blanket, and suddenly masked men are in your living room.
Right. And the scrutiny on his inner life and his private trauma became a major point of cultural friction. In 2007, several years after his death, a biographer named David Michaelis published a massive, highly anticipated biography on Schulz.
And the biography was explosive. Michaelis essentially argued that Schulz's genius was entirely dependent on him being a cold, tormented, deeply unhappy person.
He really leaned into that angle.
He did. The book spent hundreds of pages scrutinizing the bitter breakup of his first marriage and portraying him as a man who pushed people away.
The Schulz family fiercely fought back against this narrative. His son Monte publicly highlighted what he called egregious factual errors and massive errors of interpretation.
It caused a huge rift.
Wait, but I have to push back here. Isn't that just the classic tortured artist cliche? Did Schulz actually need to be miserable to draw Charlie Brown, or was this biographer just retrofitting the facts to create a dramatic, gloomy narrative to sell books?
That is exactly the debate the book sparked. Critics of the biography argued that Michaelis had an almost voyeuristic agenda. They felt he bent the reality of Schulz's life to fit a pre-existing thesis.
Which is pretty unfair to the subject.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a really difficult dilemma in historical analysis. How much of an artist's personal pain is responsible for their work, and where is the line between valid psychological analysis and unfair intrusion?
Especially when you consider how nuanced his actual philosophies were, specifically regarding religion. He didn't fit neatly into any box.
He really didn't.
When he first returned from World War II, grieving his mother, a local pastor invited him to the Church of God. He threw himself into it. He taught Sunday school, went to church 3 times a week, and read the entire Bible cover to cover 3 times.
You see that fundamentalist background heavily in early Peanuts. The classic A Charlie Brown Christmas Special literally stops in its tracks so Linus can recite the Gospel of Luke under a spotlight.
Oh, yeah. Such a famous scene.
Schulz always said Linus represented his spiritual, inquisitive side.
But over the decades, his views totally shifted. By the late 1980s, he told interviewers he didn't attend church at all anymore. He started identifying as a secular humanist.
A pretty big shift.
Yeah, his widow noted that he felt the universe and God were deeply mysterious, and he absolutely hated cheap religious platitudes like, it's all God's will.
But he didn't become a bitter cynic either. When his daughter Amy converted to Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Schulz didn't hide his personal feelings. He bluntly told her he thought the religion was a hoax.
Ouch.
Yet, despite a complete theological disagreement, he fully and warmly supported her. He told her that he deeply valued the bond they shared through her belief in Christ. He could separate his own skepticism from his love for his family's spiritual well-being.
And he poured all of that evolving, complicated empathy right back into his daily drawings. Which brings us to the final years of his life. Moving into the 1980s and 90s, Schulz starts facing serious physical hurdles.
Yeah, his health really started to decline.
For a long time, there's a huge myth circulating that he had Parkinson's disease because people noticed his drawing hand was shaking terribly.
According to medical records later released by his family, it wasn't Parkinson's, but a condition called an essential tremor. It could be somewhat managed by beta blockers, but it permanently altered his line work.
You can really see it in the later years.
If you look at peanut strips from the late 90s, the lines are noticeably shakier, thinner, and more fragile.
But here is the crucial detail. In the comic strip industry, when a creator gets sick or just gets tired, they hire teams of ghost illustrators. Jim Davis did it with Garfield. But even with his hand trembling, Schulz absolutely refused to let anyone else ink his comic.
He insisted on doing every single line himself.
Why do you think he was so stubborn about that?
Because for Schulz, the physical act of drawing wasn't a manufacturing process. The shaking line was him. To hand a pen to someone else would be a betrayal of the deeply personal connection he had built with his audience.
That is beautiful. But eventually, his body gave out. In November of 1999, he suffered several small strokes. During treatment, doctors discovered he had colorectal cancer that had metastasized.
Just devastating news.
The chemotherapy severely affected his vision, and he realized he physically could not draw anymore. On December 14, 1999, he announced his retirement.
He sat down for an interview with Al Roker on the Today Show, and it remains one of the most heartbreaking television moments. He'd always assumed he would draw the strip well into his 80s, and suddenly the pen was just taken away from him by his own failing health.
During that press tour, someone asked him a question that just wrecks me. They asked if, for the very final strip, he would finally let Charlie Brown run up and kick the football that Lucy was always holding.
Oh, man. For 50 years, Lucy had been yanking that football away at the last millisecond, sending Charlie Brown flying through the air to land flat on his back.
Right, and Schulz immediately said, "Oh no, definitely not. That would be a terrible disservice to him after nearly half a century."
He understood that resolving the tension would ruin the philosophical truth of the comic.
But then, in a different interview just days later, he was recounting the moment he signed the final Sunday strip. He started choking up, holding back tears, and he said, "All of a sudden I thought, that poor kid, he never even got to kick the football. What a dirty trick. He never had a chance to kick the football."
He was weeping for his own creation.
Papa.
It was a manifestation of his own lifelong sense of melancholy. He felt the pain of his own character's unresolved struggle.
The timing of what happened next is so poetic, it sounds like fiction. Charles Schulz died in his sleep of a heart attack on February 12, 2000. He was 77 years old.
And the timing was incredible.
He passed away the exact night before his final original Sunday peanut strip was published in morning newspapers around the entire world.
It is as if he held on just long enough to see his life's work through to its exact predetermined conclusion. The strip outlived him by mere hours.
His legacy, of course, is towering. He put a stipulation in his contract requesting that no other artist ever be allowed to draw peanuts. And remarkably, the syndicate honored it.
They run classic reruns to this day instead of hiring ghost artists.
He was posthumously awarded the Congressional Gold Medal.
And we can't forget his impact on the space program. NASA literally named the Apollo 10 command and lunar modules Charlie Brown and Snoopy. To this day, NASA gives out the prestigious Silver Snoopy Award to employees for outstanding achievements in flight safety.
Sparky, the shy kid from Minnesota whose high school rejected his drawings, literally made it to the moon. So what does this all mean for us?
This is a great question.
We started by looking at a soldier who forgot to load his weapon, a man whose heart was broken by the little red-haired girl. He proved that you don't need to be a flawless superhero to conquer the world.
You just need to be radically, deeply honest about your flaws.
He took the awful, sinking feeling of failing to kick a football, and he turned it into a global security blanket.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. If you were to draw a 4-panel comic strip of your own life today, which of your everyday failures, anxieties, or awkward quirks would actually turn out to be your most endearing qualities to the rest of the world?
Think about that. Because as Charles Schulz proved over 50 years, sometimes the things you think are your biggest Charlie Brown moments might actually be your greatest strengths.